All right, lift off and the clock has started.
Hey everyone, I'm Tom June, and we're going to talk about recent rocket failures, specifically the Vega C and Virgin Orbit Launcher 1 recent failures. Now, back in December 2022, Arianespace launched their Vega C rocket, which is the newest rocket in their lineup, for only the second time from the French Guiana spaceport in South America. This mission was to deliver another 2 Earth imaging and observation satellites as part of the Pleiades constellation, and was actually the first commercial cargo mission for Arianespace and the European Space Agency. First stage performance was nominal and we had a good separation of the second stage, but around 6 minutes into the flight, the rocket suddenly decided to stop going up the way, which is decidedly what a rocket is not supposed to do. Instead, we saw it power its way back down to the Earth on a ballistic trajectory, basically turning it from a benign, peace-orientated mission into a massive missile. Flight controllers then decided to terminate the flight, hitting the self-destruct button, and it broke into tiny little pieces somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean, with a total loss of rocket and payload. Now, in the months afterwards, an investigation has taken place, and we now know that this failure was apparently caused by a faulty motor valve in the second stage. Interestingly, the second stage is a solid fuel rocket manufactured by Avio. Anyway, the component that failed was a throat insert, which regulates the flow of exhaust through the nozzle. It's made of a carbon-carbon material, and it's designed to withstand the extreme pressures and temperatures at that end of the engine. But apparently it didn't. So it seems that this part is basically burned up, or what the investigators call a thermomechanical over-erosion. Sure. That led to a pressure drop in the nozzle, resulting in a loss of thrust. Now, while it didn't stop the motor from continuing to fire, it did effectively starve it of those exhaust gases and kind of choke the engine to death. This part was actually supplied by a Ukrainian company some years prior, and it appears for some reason it managed to pass through previous safety checks, although its failure did raise concerns about the validity of those checks and, whether the qualification criteria for the checks was in line with accepted, guidelines. But that company, they did supply the same part for that previous Vega C launch in July of 2022, and that flight was a success. So it's not exactly known what's gone wrong, and in fact, recently, or more recently than that report has come out in the previous days, the Ukrainian government has actually criticized that report, basically saying, don't blame us for what's happened, these things do go wrong from time to time. That hasn't stopped Arianespace from basically saying we're going to manufacture that part ourselves in-house and supply that for the next Vega C launch, which they are still saying is on track for the end of 2023 once they've done a full round of checks on that next rocket. So that brings us to Virgin Orbit's Start Me Up mission, that historic, if somewhat incomplete, first rocket launch from the UK back in January 2023. Similar to the Vega C launch, we had a good takeoff from Spaceport Cornwall, a good initial launch with the first stage, but just a short time after second stage separation, the rocket suddenly lost thrust, failed to reach orbit, and fell back into the Atlantic Ocean. So, in the time since that failure, or as I call it, an incomplete mission, the investigators have looked at the data and have concluded that the failure was caused by a dislodged fuel filter in that second stage. Now, as with any mechanically propelled vehicle, whether it's a car or a ship or a rocket, filtration is a normal part of any working engine. This particular fuel filter was within the fuel feed line, and it costs somewhere in the region of $100, so it's a fairly innocuous part. But because of where it lies in the engine, when it dislodged, possibly due to being poorly seated or, vibrations during the flight itself, whatever the case was, basically it starved the engine of fuel. This led to the fuel pump overcompensating and operating at way higher temperatures than what it was designed to do. The engine basically then overheated, multiple components failed, resulting in a total loss of thrust and then loss of the rocket and the payloads. So it's interesting that such small parts on both rockets failed, parts which are nowhere near the cost of other critical components, but it does show the importance of each and every piece within a rocket system. So what's next for Virgin Orbit? Well, back in February, the Polish satellite manufacturer Zapsplat signed a new contract for future launches with Virgin Orbit, lasting for the foreseeable future. Zapsplat had payloads on the Start Me Up mission because they manufacture for other companies based in Europe and elsewhere around the world, including those first Omani satellites. And Virgin themselves are already planning for the next launch, which is due to take place from Mojave, California later this year. But Richard Branson himself has had to pump in an additional $15 million of his own money into the company just to keep them afloat. So who really knows what's going to happen with them? Melissa Thorpe, the head of Spaceport Cornwall, said that she's still hoping for another Virgin Orbit launch in the UK by the end of 2023. But will we actually see it happen? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I've been Tom June, and I'll see you next time.